Hey guys, it's Thursday, and you might hear Momo purring too, because he's right by the microphone. Right, Momo? Yeah, which is kind of appropriate because I realized I haven't done a video on my personal YouTube channel about Far Cry Primal yet. And this is a problem, isn't it, Momo? Because Ubisoft was kind enough to invite some local media down to their Toronto studio, their Toronto building, to give us 4 hours with the game, and that was pretty cool. It's always kind of surprising when you get that much access so far out. And so I thought I'd give you guys a little bit of a rundown. Obviously, we couldn't show anything or anything like that because it's still, I think it was still an alpha build. There were little things here and there that, you know, there's going to be a tiny bit of graphics cleanup, but it looked pretty good. There are just little polishes here and there. And it wasn't a locked off part of the game. Like, it wasn't a demo. It was the game. You could explore freely. It actually got to the point where I told myself, like, look, stop collecting things. You're not going to be able to get them all in 4 hours. So what did I learn about Far Cry Primal? First of all, one of the questions I had going in was, are they going to be able to maintain those beats of Far Cry, this sort of failed state where humanity is at its worst? The drug inferences mixed with the spirituality, mixed with the violence, and the failed state element isn't there because of the way it's set up. It's set up that these three different types of early human being, or direct cousins of human beings like Neanderthals, are all sort of competing for dominance in this newly discovered valley. And you play this one tribe, and you're a character that is a beastmaster. And I actually got to see how the character becomes the beastmaster, and yes, it does involve a drug induced haze, and it's actually a really cool moment. It's disgusting, the way they do it. I'm not going to spoil for you, but it was a good little ew moment. And there's quite a few ew moments early on in the game. The game is brutally violent in a way that's different than previous Far Cry games because it's all very rudimentary weaponry. It's spears and clubs and things like that, and a bow. I mean, the bow we're used to, but spears and clubs are, pretty brutal weapons. And they didn't make the combat incredibly bloody and, realistic per se. Ubisoft tends to avoid the dismemberments and all that stuff. But there's a mammoth hunt that goes wrong and a saber-toothed tiger attack that get pretty chunky. They get pretty, it's not the jibbing we expect, the body parts flying everywhere in that cartoonish manner that I will forever associate with the Baldur's Gate games. But it's like exposed organs and, eviscerations and like guts hanging out. And it sets you up that this world is not a nice place. And the character designs are very, very interesting. There was a unique challenge in Far Cry Primal. You're going to be reading a lot of subtitles. If you don't like subtitles, I'm sorry, there's no way to get around subtitles in this game because the language is this early, and it's apparently based on actual stuff. Like, they got a couple consultants, a husband and wife team from Kentucky. If you saw my video on The Escapist about it, they talked about this. But how people moved, the early language they think they spoke. I don't know how they know this. I don't know how they know the, oral rudimentary language precursor that early mankind used, but it's pretty cool. And they actually are speaking a language. It's not gibberish. You hear words being used over and over again. It's like, when the tiger shows up, it's tigre, tigre, this sort of thing. And you do hear words, the names of the peoples, the stuff like that. It's all there, which to me as a history nerd is pretty cool. It's enough to bring me in. And then of course there are the animals. I had enough time to try the early Beastmaster mechanics. Now, they had a previous hands-on that was exclusively the Beastmaster mechanics. And so I got a lot of time with sort of later game stuff as well. And they are fun. It's going to wreak havoc with the game balance because the bears are so tanky. And I asked the developers about this, and they said that they've deliberately made later game enemies more challenging than we're necessarily used to in Far Cry games because of, the reality that you've got these animals that combo as a co-op partner and a weapon. The bears take a lot of damage. Even, in the early game stuff, I accidentally set one on fire, and this flaming bear ran through the countryside, setting everything it passed on fire. The whole hill was just burning, and the bear was still going. It was this glorious open world moment that I think sort of defines the Far Cry series. I mean, the way fire spreads I know Far Cry 4. I don't remember if I'm mixing up 4 and 3. But that was something that always amazed me, that oh wow, they've actually managed to create spread patterns and all this stuff. And it's even funnier in Primal because it's early man, right? We don't have the ways of extinguishing fires or modern buildings or anything like that. So they get out of control really fast. You have to be careful when you're lighting your little signal fires to unlock your village checkpoints that you don't accidentally set the thing on fire. And it makes you feel really stupid, but in a delightful way. It's very funny how everything just goes up like a tinderbox. But, on the other side, you can have the bear take out 6 different guys without you doing very much of anything, provided, the health doesn't get too low. The thing is, they're working with the game balance to try to make sure that it doesn't become too easy. And that's going to be something I'm watching for in the finished version, is difficulty. They've definitely got the fun factor down. I mean, I think you guys can hear it when I'm laughing about setting the bear on fire and it running through the wilderness, just blazing a trail of glory. And then there are some early encounters with the Neanderthal type people. I won't say the names of the tribes because it won't mean anything to you guys right now. And I mean, of course, obviously their branding is big on all these different tribes, but it's a Neanderthal type tribe, and they can be quite tough early on when you've just got, you and your wolf. It's cool though that when you take a stealth approach, they've animated the animal so that he kind of crouches down and doesn't just change the stance. It changes the way the wolf behaves as well. So you don't have to worry about that particular unit taking off and eating the people and ruining your stealth attack. You actually have to command the wolf to do its thing. The AI isn't like your party members in Final Fantasy 12, which is what caused me to give up on the game. I like playing stealth. And when my party members are running off, destroying my stealth approach, I get angry really fast. But the early going of the game is more challenging than I am used to. Because you know how you tend to, you crash and it's this big cinematic opening and you meet the primary antagonist sort of thing. At least the primary antagonist for the first part of the game. And then you're dumped into this valley and you immediately get a handgun in a Far Cry game. Well, that didn't happen in Primal because there's no handgun. You get a club, which is not the same. And so those early moments before you get those first few abilities, you have to be really careful. You can't just go, running into the wilderness because something will get you. Whether they deliberately put, I'm blanking on what it is now, but they deliberately put something very tough right in the direct line of your first major objective. And so you have to sort of do um, a loop around the outside so you don't get stomped, because it's like, I don't know if you guys played the expansion, the Valley of the Yeti stuff, and those first few Yeti were really tough. It's similar to that. So I think there's definitely more difficulty early on than the numbered Far Cry games. Now, that doesn't mean it's hard. It means I died 2 or 3 times. And I don't think these games are really intended for you to die a lot if you play properly. It's intended to sort of give you that sense of being in that environment. There's a simulatory quality to it's a violence tourism simulator, the Far Cry games, but not in the way that the Bethesda games are, not in the way, especially Skyrim. It was such a dark fantasy simulator as opposed to an RPG. There are these elements that I find pull you in, and of course those come from the characters. And Ubisoft is a company that is reliant on its characters. Those characters have to pull you through sort of a gameplay formula that is long in the tooth by this point. And when you have those great characters in, say, an Assassin's Creed game, it pulls you in despite the repetitiveness of the sort of open world module system they've got. Something like, Watch Dogs, which was an experiment in a lot of characters that were thoroughly unlikable, I believe deliberately, didn't pull people in the same way. Personally for me, I was not as enamored of Pagan Min in Far Cry 4 as Vas Montenegro in Far Cry 3. And so Far Cry 3 is still my favorite Far Cry game, even though intellectually I recognize that there were some improvements in 4. And that's obviously a big challenge in a game like Primal, where the characters aren't speaking a discernible language. And so they did it through character design. The one female character, here she is here in the video footage I'm showing you right now. She's got these piercing blue eyes, and she's not that typical video game sort of Girl Friday female sidekick. She, you get the sense, is bonkers, like kind of nuts from either spending too much time alone or just the sheer sort of wild-eyed way that people would be if things were constantly trying to kill them. And there's this really tough to experience scene early on where you get sort of this early healing mechanic that involves chewing up these green leaves and grinding it into this wound to make sure it doesn't get infected. It's like, but it's cool because otherwise I think she'd be dismissed as sort of a damsel in distress, the dreaded damsel in distress, that thing you can never use because it's been overused and the moral powers that be in gaming have determined is bad and not just overused. But they get around that, I think, because she is sort of she's your village contact. And then there's a guy who, it's terrible. He reminds me of Rafiki from The Lion King, just because he's sort of that shaman type character. But he also reminds me of the character from Far Cry 2, who was that diamond smuggler character who comes back for 4. He reminds me a lot of him too. But they're very different characters. And they had to do that through movement, and they had to do that through inflection, and they had to do that through its expression. And I'm still kind of amazed that video games have gotten so good with motion capture, especially Ubisoft's motion capture, that we can talk about these nuanced expressions in video game characters. That hasn't gotten old for me yet. I still have this childlike wonder when I meet this new digital character the first time, and it's like, wow, I'm interacting with this character like they're a person. And that's still amazing to me. And Far Cry has that in spades. The character designs are so well done, at least the ones I encountered early on. And I think that's because they had to tell you a lot about these characters without a lot of exposition, because who wants to read too much text, right? They've got to really show the story as opposed to tell the story, because while yes, they're talking to each other, and yes, there are little cutscenes and dialogue and things like that, you can't do too much of that because you're not listening, you're reading. And when your eyes are down reading a subtitle, you're not watching what the characters are doing. So really unique mocap challenge for the design team, for the actors, for the, the mocap directors. So I think top-notch work there. But now we come to the big question, because it is a video game and not a movie. How does it play? Is this Avatar in the Stone Age, or is it actually something that is fun as a game? It is very much a Far Cry experience. It controls similarly. The one thing I will say is that the controls get complicated fast. It does it does ease you in for the most part, but I had to look a few things up. Now, the nice thing is I could look it up. I didn't have to call a dev over and say, how do you do this? I could look it up through the menus. But this is a complex game. This is a game that lets you do a lot of things quickly early on. And so, again, it's that difficulty thing, right? This is not the super accessible, make it easy and tell a good story concept that Ubisoft is kind of known for in their their annuals, the Assassin's Creed type thing. There is more, I won't say challenge, but it certainly encourages skill. Because like I said, I only died 2 or 3 times. This is not Dark Souls, right? But there is certainly once you get the weapon switching down, it becomes a lot smoother. And once you learn how to set weapons on fire in combat, because fire, yeah, I was joking about it earlier, but fire is your friend, especially early on when you don't have the skill to go in stealth. You don't even have your owl yet. Your owl is the way they managed to replace the camera from previous Far Cry games, so you can still mark and sort of scout out the bases, for lack of a better term, the enemy camps, before you go in. And you really need to, because of the way the day-night cycle works and the way the colors deliberately make it hard to distinguish. Is that a person? Is that an animal? What's going on around this, next rise? The sounds as well really make it seem like things are constantly coming at you. And I really enjoyed the game's sound. It's deliberately loud and overwhelming at first, and then it sort of eases off, which I thought was very cool. Sound design is something that's really undervalued in video games because you can't put it on box art. But it's something that I think can make or break a game in terms of really bringing a person in and making them believe that fictional reality you're trying to sell. And so there was a lot to like in the first 4 hours. I know people are always very skeptical about Ubisoft games from a quality control perspective. Those bugs are something that people have the right to be concerned about. It's an ongoing issue now. However, the fact that they just gave us the game and let us play, I think says a lot to the fact that this game is going to be stable. I don't know anything about a PC port. It was provided in their offices on a PS4. So I have no idea what the PC version is. When it gets closer to launch, I'll try to get you guys more information about that, because I know I've got a lot of PC gamers that watch this channel. The other thing I wanted to see is travel, because it's a world as big as Far Cry 4. I was told by a developer the map is as big as Far Cry 4, but there's no vehicles until you get the ability to ride certain animals, and even they don't move as fast as a car would. So they've done some interesting little design things, including a pretty fast loading fast travel, because fast travel is only fast if this game loads fast. And that was a problem with previous games of this type, that fast travel wasn't. So they've cut down some of the times on fast travel so you actually can jump around, because by the time you venture out and have to go back to your village to sort of level up and invest those skill points in the society that you're building, because it does give you resource perks. Build your villages up enough, your sort of homestead, for lack of a better term, and it does start generating, it starts mining resources for you, and those are super important because all the combat is based on a crafting system of sorts. It's rudimentary weapons, right? So instead of finding weapons, the focus is more on crafting weapons. And so that, I mean, that's a neat system, but you are hauling around a lot of stuff in your inventory. You are going to be foraging a lot, which makes sense because you're, a prehistoric early person. But so because of that, because I was really trying to look at how the gameplay systems worked and how the exploration worked, the way they adapt a grappling hook type thing is pretty neat. But that sort of verticality is also there. So you don't just go out, you go up. And so I definitely focused more on the core gameplay experience than, trying to nail those story points early on. Because to me, Far Cry has not been about the story. It's usually just go in and take over this place. That's the basics. And yeah, sure, there's pretenses with, various character motivations. But really, when it comes down to, it's exploring this wild, either failed place or untamed place. And it's about, I describe the perfect Far Cry moment in Far Cry 4 was when I took over an enemy base riding an elephant assisted by a tiger. That is Far Cry for me. The actual experience, the actual story is more the one I tell for myself in game than following the campaign. And I think that's what makes it a good game, as opposed to a good story or a good narrative in a mediocre game, is it actually is very fun to play. And I think that my prediction is that Primal is going to be divisive, because some people are going to feel like it doesn't mix the formula up enough. It's not a numbered game, though, so we shouldn't be expecting that. But I think some people are going to have more difficulty adapting away from that go in guns blazing really quick gameplay and it being more of a melee first person experience. And I'm the first one to say first person melee combat is not my favorite thing. The thing that saves it here, I think, is the fact that you do have that animal. So you do have something you're watching on the screen. You're not just a pair of hands the whole time. And the combat is so bloody and so sort of flaily and, whack at it until it's down that it kind of works. First person melee will never be my favorite thing, but it kind of works in this environment to the point that it's still fun to play. And at the end of the day, that's the point, right? That it's fun. And, feeding this, carnivorous animal that was trying to kill you earlier in the game until you guys became buddies and like petting it and going, who's a good wolf? Yeah, you. That's all fun. That's all fun. And that's what it comes down to. At the end of the day, my thing for recommending a game is not whether it tells a groundbreaking story or whether it's has artistic merit or any of that stuff. At the end of the day, it has to be fun. And as much as I love all that pretentious, latte drinking stuff, I admit I personally like that stuff. But if a game is clunky and a real chore to play to get to those sort of thinky person experiences, I'm not going to recommend it. The game has to be fun. And at the end of that 4 hours, when I'd had too much coffee and not enough food, I still wanted to play more. And it's very rare I will sit down and spend more than 3 hours on a video game nowadays. My hands can't take it. Too much carpal tunnel, too much repetitive stress. And yeah, I hurt the next day and the day after and the day after that from spending that much concentrated time with the controller. But it was fun. and I'm looking forward to the final version. And yeah, they have said they'll give me a review copy so that I can let you guys know what the actual finished product is. It's out in March, I want to say. I will check that. Check the description box. I will make sure that. But yeah, Far Cry Primal, off to a good start. Really liked what I saw.